Close your eyes for a second and imagine Germany. Do you see medieval town squares, large beers, cars flying by without speed limits, world-class engineering, people arriving to parties exactly at the time on the invitation? What if we told you everything you imagined is wrong?
Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. This is my wife Aubrey and I am Donnie, and we are two Americans currently living in Germany and sharing all of our experiences and travels here on our channel. Before we moved to Germany, like we have mentioned in some of our other videos, I had studied in Bonn and lived with a German family, and we both had traveled in and out of Germany on a couple of different occasions. So we felt like we had a pretty good idea of what Germany was about, but still after moving here, we have learned so much about what and who Germany really is. And a lot of that is also thanks to you guys for teaching us in the comments, Instagram message, and on Twitter, and always reaching out to us, teaching us so much about this country. So today we wanted to talk about some of the assumptions that many Americans have of Germany and what we have found to be true or not true. In our video, Americans really think that, but Germans really are this.
Right off the bat, we need to talk about one of the classic assumptions of Germany because it will affect all the differences following this one. That is the assumption of the postcard image that Americans have of Germany in their heads. The one with half-timbered homes and medieval town centers generally isn't true. What most Americans think is Germany is actually very specifically Bavaria. One possible explanation that we have seen for this is due to the strong American presence in this portion of West Germany after the war. These images are the kind of postcards that were sent home by soldiers, and you really can find those places in Bavaria. One of the biggest things we have learned about Germany living here is how diverse it is. Each region of Germany has their own culture, dialects, and we mean basically sometimes different languages, foods, architecture, and more. We have really learned you can't say that Germany is this way or in Germany they do this, because Germany is way more diverse than Americans can imagine, and that is a huge generalization in many instances. And therefore, almost any assumptions Americans have made of Germany is going to be proven wrong at some point because of the diversity of this country.
American media is filled with comedy sketches about the German language and the way that the Germans talk.
Surprise!
Überraschung!
And even some Germans come to America and make a career propagating this stereotype.
You guys have a fun Santa man. He is fun and up and down and jelly bean and what, mistletoe. Yeah, no. We have a fear-based holiday is our Christmas.
But one thing that is extremely lacking for obvious reasons in the US are actual Germans speaking German around Americans. Therefore, this media has caused Americans to make the assumption that the German language is extremely harsh and intense sounding, or sometimes they think it is quite bubbly and kind of goofy sounding.
What, mistletoe.
Either way, this image of an extreme language, whether harsh or bubbly, is extremely prevalent. Well, since living here, learning the language, hearing it, and speaking it every day, we have some unfortunate news. It sounds pretty basic, but basic in a good way. It is not like Hitler shouting or like how Flula talks. It sounds just pretty normal. Of course, there are a lot of sounds and throaty noises that they make that are not in the English language that can make an American stop and wonder about it, but it actually sounds pretty cool. I mean, in everyday conversation, the German language is no romantic French, and they do have some insanely long words and some fun throaty noises that we don't have in English again, but most Americans would be surprised at how calm German sounds when listening to just a regular conversation between two German speakers.
A classic German stereotype that you hear a lot is about German engineering and how amazing Germans are at it in innovating new technologies. This causes Americans to form this assumption that Germany is very modern and techy, but that isn't necessarily true. Now, we aren't saying that Germany is old-fashioned and archaic. I mean, you visit Frankfurt and you would see an obviously extremely modern city, and you'd almost think you're in like Los Angeles, Tokyo, or Dubai in terms of modern cities. But more so, what we've learned living here is that Germans are quite weary of new technologies in many ways and of digitalization. For example, cash is very much king in Germany, and many Germans reject paying with card if they can avoid it. And it's not uncommon to come across stores that still either prefer or only accept cash. Then there are things like the Anmeldung. Whenever you move to a new place in Germany, you have to schedule an appointment with your local government and go in person to register your address. And you can't just simply do it online. Then there also is a great reliance on traditional mail service, or snail mail, as we like to call it. Most of our registration process and setting up our lives in Germany required us to wait on businesses or government agencies to send us letters in the mail with contracts or registration forms. But most of the same processes in the US are done online and with e-signatures. In fact, every time we check our mailbox here, we can expect a few letters a week. Whereas in the US, we hardly ever got mail. A great visualization of this is on Google Maps. If you look at Europe and grab the street view guy, the rest of Europe will light up with possible street views, but there will be a huge, obvious hole in Germany with very few options. Overall, it's not that Germany is lacking or lagging behind in technology at all. There's just a hesitation to adopt it in many cases because they want their personal freedoms protected rather than allowing some business or government institution to track them or have access to their personal information. I can't necessarily say that I blame them, and sometimes in the US, I think we can be too quick to adopt new technologies that can give up a part of our freedom.
Along with German engineering, you often hear about how punctual Germans are and how much they love being on time down to the millisecond. This also carries over to a lot of Americans working under the assumption this is true in all cases in Germany, and the German society functions under strict times and perfectly to a T. First off, if you have seen the gridlock traffic on the Autobahn in and around Stuttgart, then you know this is actually not possible. But another case are the German trains. If you want German trains, go to Switzerland. That was an article title of a DW article from 2017 that highlighted Germans' growing frustration with German trains not running on time like they do in Switzerland. In fact, we used to brag all the time about how the German trains run to the minute on time when we traveled here. We would have a train time with a weird non-round number like 7:43 departure, and at exactly 7:43 the train would take off. However, since living here and relying on the trains more often, I cannot count the number of times the train has been canceled or delayed, and in some instances it seems like the trains run more late than on time in reality. In fact, in 2018, 75% of long-distance trains in Germany were more than 6 minutes late, according to the local.de.
Speaking of travel in Germany, a big draw for a lot of Americans to Germany is the chance to drive on the world-famous German Autobahn. However, the majority of Americans we have talked to, including ourselves before we came to Germany, have two very important incorrect assumptions about the Autobahn that we have mentioned in a previous video. They are that 1, the Autobahn is one famous road, and 2, the Autobahn has no speed limit. These assumptions are wrong because the Autobahn translated is simply highway and is actually a major network of highways, about 8,000 miles in total. And the Autobahn does have zones where you can drive as fast as you want, but 30% of the Autobahn does have speed limits.
When an American is going on their first trip to Germany, it is extremely common for other Americans to give them advice to not tip at European restaurants after paying the bill. The assumption for many Americans is that it is just mainly a US custom to tip at the end of a meal because that is a major part of waiter pay. But in Europe, they pay them the full salary and therefore you don't need a tip. I also have to admit that we fell into this stereotype and I always felt weird not tipping, but I had been told this so many times and I didn't tip while I was in Germany traveling. We have since learned that it is customary to tip in Germany at a restaurant, and when paying by card, the waiter will typically bring the card reader to the table, and when they show you the total, you will just tell them to round it up about 5 to 10%, and then you pay with the tip included. Or when you are walking away from the table, you can leave about 5 to 10% of the total amount on the table as a tip in cash. This is different than in the US, where a 15% tip is normally seen as kind of the average minimum tip, and a lot of people can go higher than that. But to you Americans, when you come and visit Germany, leave a tip. Now, before we move on to our final and our biggest assumptions Americans have about Germany, if you've enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and definitely hit the bell icon so you can be notified every time we upload a new video. We would love to continue sharing our adventures and experiences here in Germany and Europe with you.
Now, for the biggest assumption of all, and that is that Germans are rude and cold. So here's the funny thing that we have heard a lot from Germans are that they sometimes perceive Americans as fake and weirdly friendly.
In Germany, if a lady is rude with serving the coffees, you're like, oh, she is having a not good day.
Yes.
But sometimes I've been to Connecticut and someone is there and they're very smiley and pouring the drinks. Good to see you! But it is not real.
So whenever we talk about these stereotypes, what we really have are two different cultures trying to compare themselves to each other, and something we are trying to stress on our channel is that neither are necessarily wrong, they are just different. What we have learned about Germans in our interactions and the friendships that we have made is that Germans are, for the most part, extremely warm and friendly. Of course, we'll always have those outliers and different types of people, and not everyone is the same, but they tend to take a little more getting to know sometimes, and they're more direct, and they don't beat around the bush with small talk. These things cause Americans to think they are rude or cold because we tend to be very indirect to avoid being perceived as rude, and we love small talk, and a lot of Americans can become friendly with someone fairly quickly.
One of my favorite personal stories of an example of German directness was as I was talking with a German woman once, and we were talking about the US. She then looked at me and said, well, you're not fat, but most Americans are fat, so why are you not? Is your family fat? And I just laughed because in the US, that is something that you would never point out and ask someone, but she wasn't really being rude. She was just interested.
This perception of Americans being fake is something also that from the outside, I can see how that can be perceived, but as an American, and especially a Southern American, I can say that I don't normally feel people are being fake. They're just being friendly and treating each other really nicely.
You see that in LA too, people that are like real smiley, but they don't mean it.
No.
But we aren't talking about the way that Germans perceive Americans in this video.
In a store or hotel, Germans can come across as cold because to them, they're just being efficient. Rather than going back and forth with pleasantries, just say what you need, I'll help you, and then we can go back to work. In the US, we have such a service-driven economy. So many businesses feel like they have to exchange lots of pleasantries back and forth with the customer and satisfy all of their needs to make them feel valued, whereas it seems Germans would rather get the business done and just move on. The difference being Americans want their work to get done, but also want to enjoy the whole experience, whereas it seems that Germans want to enjoy the experience by getting it done as efficiently and as quickly as possible.
So this is a very complex topic actually, and could probably warrant its own video. But what we will say is that Germans are warm, friendly, and giving, but a lot of times it is expressed in a different way. But Americans have to adjust their mindset, and they will definitely see that as well.
Along these lines, we have also had to adjust the way that we read some of your comments from our German subscribers, because sometimes they can come across as very direct and somewhat intense, but we just remember this is a more direct and a different culture, and you guys actually have been so helpful in teaching us more about this country we are now living in, along with our daily experiences from our German interactions around us. So please continue to let us know your thoughts. What assumptions have you heard that are or aren't true about the US or Germany? Once again, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in our next video.
Cheers! Then there are things like the Anmeldung. Then there are things like the Anmeldung. Then there are things like the Anmeldung.
A strong learning curve
that we have mentioned in a previous video.
We have since learned that it is customary to not trip in German. And then we can go will be back. She has to go to a German class, and then we'll finish filming this video.